This video is brought to you by patreon.com/worsttake. Get access to exclusive live streams and Discord servers, on-screen shoutouts, and early access to some videos when you join now. Help make sure that we can continue to make content like this by supporting the Patreon. Links are in the description down below. Free agency is always a wild ride, right? We always have the big fish that we look for and that we try to get. And sometimes you get one of those guys, sometimes you get none of those guys. But then there are the signings that happen and they're under the radar a little bit. Like maybe it's a little bit of a big deal, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. We're not freaking out. We're not, putting billboards up over these moves. Or some of these moves might just straight up be unexpected. So that's why I'm going to talk about the under the radar and unexpected free agency deals that could happen for the Cleveland Browns this offseason. And I'm going to start with the under the radar moves. Under the radar move that I think nobody's really going to care that much about when it happens, but I do think would be a big deal in the long run is re-signing Za'Darius Smith. I don't think Za'Darius Smith had the best year he could last year, but I also think that he's due up for a better year. I don't think he's so old that he's cooked. I think he was playing through a lot of injuries. The season never started off on the right foot. We saw him dominate in camp and everything before he got some of these injuries that kind of just stacked up on him, especially that ankle. And I think, if he has a healthy year, he's going to be able to produce at a very high level. Danielle Hunter is also somebody who would be on that list. I wouldn't be as excited about him simply because I think Za'Darius can be better than him. But Danielle Hunter would be a big name, and I think people would make a little bit of a big deal out of that because of his sack numbers last year. But I think Za'Darius is actually the better player. Leonard Williams is another guy that I think would be a big deal. And I talked about this in my free agency video. You really want to get more guys who can create some havoc on that defensive line, because when the Browns have had bad games, it's been because everybody outside of Myles Garrett can't win some one-on-ones, right? And when that happens, this defense starts to get flustered, and they start to sink a little bit. So if you can win outside of Myles Garrett, you can have those guys win one-on-ones. You're going to be in a better position. Leonard Williams is a bit of a hellraiser on that front. Other guys who fit that description: Jonathan Grenard, an edge rusher from Houston. He was their leader in sacks this year. I think he will be a bit of a hellraiser as well. And Calais Campbell, old man Calais. He's always been known as a hellraiser. He's 6'9", he's long. And I think that he still has a little bit to offer an NFL team. It wouldn't be the biggest deal in the world, but I do think it would absolutely do something for the Cleveland Browns if they were able to get their hands on Calais Campbell. So those are the defensive line guys that I would be interested in. Let's talk about some pass catchers. I think the Browns could stand to add another tight end. Dalton Schultz is the guy I look at. He's a good enough inline blocker to stay on the field at all times and a good enough receiver to really play off of Njoku. When teams have two good tight ends who can catch the ball, they're really, really difficult to guard. And the Browns already have one dynamic tight end that's difficult to stop. If you can add a second one to it, kind of like how the Ravens have with Isaiah Likely and Mark Andrews, it becomes very difficult to stop. And I think that that's one of the things the Browns might look to add. Marquise Brown is a name that I've heard being thrown around. I'm gonna be honest with you, I wouldn't be the most excited about this name because it's more the same from the Cleveland Browns. Another undersized receiver who doesn't really win 50-50 balls, who doesn't really finish through contact, but he's a deep threat because he can run downfield. And I think that's been the Browns' biggest issue. Like, size is one thing, and size is important. I do want the Browns to add size at wide receiver, but finishing through contact is my big thing, right? If you're going to get a deep threat, they have to be able to finish through contact. And if you don't have somebody who can finish through contact, you have nobody who could be a deep threat truly, because they're not really a threat to catch the ball deep. They're more of a threat to be open deep, but that don't guarantee that they're going to catch that damn thing. Because if you want to catch the ball deep, you have to fight through some contact. And Marquise Brown has not been somebody who can finish plays through contact ever in his career. Not consistently, at least. He does it every once in a while, but not consistently. On the flip side of that, I do like Gabe Davis, even though he has some inconsistencies in that area as well. He's a bigger body, 6'3". He's shown himself to be somebody who can get downfield, get open downfield. You already have Ken Dorsey, who's familiar with Gabe Davis. So I think this will be a move that makes a ton of sense. You don't really have to change much around in the wide receiver room. He gives you another big body, another red zone threat that you could use, and I think he would be very useful. Let's talk about backup running back, right? Because we're getting Nick Chubb back, but also we're going to upgrade the backup running back position. Here are some veterans you could look at for the Cleveland Browns to do. And since these guys play running back, it won't be the biggest deal in the world, but it will be something. DeAndre Swift. I've always liked DeAndre Swift. I've always felt like DeAndre Swift has gotten the short end of the stick, either because of injuries, playing time, whatever it is. Every time the Eagles ran DeAndre Swift, I'm like, damn, they should do that more often. They don't ever do it more often. And I think that's part of the reason they had such a disastrous season, because like they just didn't want to rely on some of the run game stuff that they added to the team. But DeAndre Swift, I think he would be an excellent option behind Nick Chubb. Outside of both of those guys being Georgia grads, I think that they'll be able to play together well. I think they complement each other well. DeAndre Swift, I would like him very much on the Cleveland Browns. Devin Singletary, he's kind of a true blue number 2 back. He's done this plenty of times in his NFL career. He's even somebody who could take the full workload if it's necessary. So if you do have a setback with Nick Chubb or an injury, you could feel good about starting the season off with Devin Singletary. And that's also another thing I think Browns fans need to consider, is that Nick Chubb might not be ready to play week 1. He might be close, but he might not be ready to play week 1. So you might have to get a running back who's not only going to be running back 2, but somebody who you could feel comfortable with being running back 1 if they had to, because you might have to start the season with this guy at running back. So that's just some food for thought. A defensive name to add to the list in the secondary, Tashaun Gibson. I think this would be to kind of replace the Ronnie McLeod role. You could also just get Ronnie McLeod, but I think T. Gip would make a lot of sense there. He's a really good run defender at that safety position. Not necessarily good enough at free safety to kind of use as a true free safety anymore, but I think he can be real good if you just limit the amount of space he's asked to carry. And then backup quarterback, I know everybody's hot on Joe Flacco, but if you can get Jacoby Brissett for a similar price to Joe Flacco, you absolutely 1000% take Jacoby Brissett. I understand Joe Flacco played well for us. I understand that Joe Flacco gave us some fun at the end of this season. I'm not trying to take anything away from that. Jacoby Brissett's the guy you go get. He's still young enough to be agile in that pocket. And look, Joe Flacco was a little agile in the pocket, but I think Jacoby brings you a little bit of a different dimension there. You already have had him work with Deshaun Watson. Now, with the changes to the offense being here, I also think Jacoby makes a little bit more sense. He's played in a bunch of different offenses, and he's had success in a bunch of different offenses. I think he makes sense here. I think Jacoby Brissett being here, that makes sense. Now I'm going to throw some wild cards at you guys. Now, these are some big names that I think the Browns could go out and get, but it'd be a little like I wouldn't know how to feel if they did this. We talked about backup running back. And we talked about one way to fill the role, right? Just get a veteran to sit behind Nick Chubb, to hold that down and maybe even start if you need it. But there's another extreme end to getting another running back, which is let's try to recreate Chubb and Hunt by having 2 starting running backs on the team. Well, there are 3 guys available that I think would fill that role. Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, or Derrick Henry. They're all going to be available this year. Derrick Henry especially is going to be available. Josh Jacobs going to be available, and Saquon Barkley going to be available. Austin Eckler is also going to be available. I'm not as big as a fan of Austin Eckler as these other 3 guys. Even though Austin's a good receiving back, he might make sense. So you might want to put him in a still a big deal, but less hype line, but not the wild line. But yeah, Saquon would be a huge deal. Obviously, like just having Saquon and Nick Chubb, the 2 best running backs from that draft class on the same team, would be wild. And then we know Saquon's a good pass threat as well. Josh Jacobs would be a big deal as well. And then Derrick Henry, I mean, like those 2 have been battling for the Russian crown for the last 3 years. I mean, not 3 years, but last 5-6 years. So It would be nuts to have them both on the same team. But yeah, I think that those three would be like the extreme end of solving it. I don't think they're out of the realm of possibility. I don't think they're very likely, but I do think that there is a chance, right, that it could happen. Mekhi Becton would also be another interesting one because the Ravens did something interesting this year. They rotated their tackles, and it made me think, with Jed Wills having the deficiencies he has, right? He's not the greatest run blocker in the world or the most consistent. And sometimes you wish you could have somebody a little bit bigger, stronger there to kind of hold down the anchor on the edge. Then I think about Mekhi Becton. I'm like, the one thing Mekhi Becton can do is run block, right? Like he can hold down the anchor. He's big as hell. And I'm thinking like, hey man, maybe you bring in Mekhi Becton to be a rotational tackle and your eligible tackle guy, right? Like the guy that you bring in when you need to bring in extra tackles. And hell, you can even give him like number 83 or something like that if you really wanted to. Just make him a tight end technically. But I think that would be an interesting way to go. It would be very unconventional to sign somebody specifically to be your tackle eligible and a rotational starter. But I think there's something to it. I think you can work something to it. But that's my list of guys who might come out of left field for the Cleveland Browns or might fly under the radar. Let me know what you think in the comment section down below. You guys have a great day and have an even better night. Peace.